2:17 p.m. The emergency room of a high-security military hospital near Washington, D.C. is suddenly charged with adrenaline. A young woman is rushed in following a high-speed collision on the Beltway. But as the trauma team moves to secure her, a massive German Shepherd K9 stands firmly over the gurney. His ears are pinned back, his body like a coiled spring. He doesn't growl, but he doesn't move, and he won't let anyone touch the patient. The handler is nowhere to be found. As the seasoned staff retreats in fear, a rookie nurse, Hannah Cole, steps forward. She quietly whispers, "Rex, stand down. Your watch is over." Hannah Cole was a woman who understood that in a world of rank, starch-pressed uniforms, and screaming sirens, the most powerful tool was often a steady, controlled breath. At 26, she had been a registered nurse for less than a year, and she had spent the last 4 months in the high-pressure environment of the Walter Reed National Military Medical Center's emergency department. To the veteran doctors and the senior charge nurses who had seen decades of combat trauma, Hannah was still a rookie. She was the one who checked the oxygen tank seals, restocked the sterile gauze, and stood in the back of the room during complex resuscitations. They saw her as quiet, perhaps even a bit too soft for the brutal, unyielding realities of military medicine. But Hannah had a background they didn't see on her resume. She had grown up on a working cattle farm in the rugged mountains of Montana, a place where animals were partners, not pets. She had spent her childhood in the dirt, learning to sense the mood of a 1,000-pound horse before it even moved a muscle. She remembered the freezing winters where a single wrong movement could spook a herd, and the quiet patience required to mend a fence while a protective mother cow watched from 10 feet away. She understood the language of instinct, the subtle shift of a shoulder or the dilation of a pupil, long before she learned the language of human anatomy and pharmacological dosages. In the hospital, the smell of antiseptic and burnt coffee was overwhelming, but if she closed her eyes, she could still tap into the primal stillness of the big sky country. The shift that Tuesday afternoon was already exhausting. The DC heat was oppressive, pressing against the glass of the hospital like a physical weight. The ER was filled with the usual mix of training injuries from Quantico and chronic cases from the nearby base. The air was thick with the hum of monitors and the distant, rhythmic pounding of a medevac helicopter landing on the roof. Then, the radio crackled with a priority red alert that silenced the room. Incoming, civilian female, 19 years old, unrestrained passenger in a high-speed rollover, suspected head trauma, internal hemorrhage, and unstable vitals. Patient is the daughter of a general, ETA 2 minutes. Note, a military K9 is on board the ambulance. He was in the vehicle during the crash. He is uninjured but highly aggressive and refusing to leave her side. The atmosphere in the trauma base shifted instantly. When the ambulance arrived, it was pure chaos. The EMTs looked rattled, their hair disheveled, their eyes wide. One technician had a torn sleeve where a tooth had snagged the fabric. As the gurney was rolled into Trauma Room 1, a magnificent, battle-scarred German Shepherd jumped out of the rig. He didn't run away, he didn't bark. He simply walked between the medics and the girl, positioning himself like an iron shield at the foot of the bed. He was a mountain of black and tan fur, and the look in his eyes was one of pure, desperate duty. "His name is Rex," one EMT shouted, wiping sweat from his forehead with a blood-stained glove. "He was in the back of the SUV when they hit the guardrail. He won't let us get a BP cuff on her. We had to bag her from a distance just to keep her breathing. He's in full protection mode. He thinks we're the ones who hurt her." The patient, a girl named Grace, was deathly pale, her breathing shallow and irregular, the oxygen mask on her face fogging with every weak exhale. She was the daughter of General Vance, a high-ranking Marine officer whose reputation for discipline was as legendary as the dog currently guarding his child. The trauma surgeon, a man named Dr. Harris, looked at the dog with a mixture of professional annoyance and genuine, mounting concern. He was a man of protocols, and large predator in the sterile field was not on his checklist. We can't treat her with that animal in here, Harris snapped, his voice rising in panic. Security! Get a tranquilizer or a catch pole. We need to move now. Her heart rate is climbing and her pressure is cratering. This is a restricted medical zone. If he lunges, we lose the patient. The senior nurses moved toward the dog, their hands outstretched in a tentative, fearful gesture. But Rex's body stiffened into a solid block of muscle. His hair rose in a jagged line along his spine, and his eyes, dark, intelligent, and ancient, tracked every single move. He gave a low vibration in his chest, not quite a growl, but a warning that resonated through the floorboards. He wasn't being aggressive for the sake of violence. He was performing a mission he had been trained to protect, and in his traumatized mind, these people in white coats were a threat to the life he was sworn to guard. The injustice of the situation was palpable. The medical staff saw a security risk, an obstacle to their procedure. But the dog saw a battlefield and a comrade who couldn't fight for herself. The conflict was reaching a violent breaking point. One of the security guards reached for his taser, and the tension in the room felt like it was about to snap. Hannah Cole stood at the charting station, her heart hammering against her ribs, but her mind was strangely clear. She didn't see a monster. She didn't see a safety violation. She saw a soldier who was terrified, confused, and hurting. She noticed the way Rex's tail was tucked slightly, a sign of fear, not just dominance. She realized that if they used force, someone was going to get bitten, and more importantly, Grace would lose the precious minutes she needed to survive the bleed in her brain. If you think calm thinking matters in emergencies, type, that's unfair. Hannah watched Rex's ears with the focus of a hawk. They weren't flattened against his head in a snarl of pure aggression. They were erect, rotating, scanning the room for the source of the noise and the scent of fear. He was overwhelmed by the high-pitched beeping of the machines and the smell of ozone. His weight wasn't on his front paws in a lunging stance. It was balanced, his haunches ready to move in any direction. He was guarding a post, not hunting a prey. Hannah remembered a specific, elective course she had taken during her clinical rotation. Working dogs in the tactical medical environment. It was a niche class taught by a retired Special Forces handler. He had said one thing that stuck in her mind like a splinter. A K-9 doesn't care about your medical degree or your rank. He cares about your pulse. He cares about your energy. If you act like a predator, he will act like a warrior. If you act like a healer, he will let you in. He can feel your heartbeat from 3 feet away. If you're scared, he's scared. Dr. Harris. Wait, Hannah said. Her voice was surprisingly firm, a low, resonant sound that sliced through the surgeon's frantic commands. Harris looked at her as if she had grown a second head. Cole, stay back. This isn't a classroom. We don't have time for a petting zoo. We need to intubate before she arrests. Security, take the shot. If you tase him or use that pole, his adrenaline will spike to the ceiling. He'll fight until his heart stops. We'll lose 10 more minutes, and he will rip through that security team before he goes down, Hannah said, stepping out from the safety of the desk and into the open, dangerous space of the trauma room. Let me try. I grew up with working dogs. I know how he's processing the room. He's not looking for a fight. He's looking for a medic. Hannah didn't walk straight toward Rex. That would be a direct challenge, an invitation to a fight. Instead, she moved laterally, keeping her body angled slightly away from him, showing him her profile. She kept her hands visible, but low, never reaching above his eye level. She didn't look him in the eye. Direct eye contact was an act of dominance that Rex would be forced to answer. Instead, she looked at his paws, then at the speckled linoleum of the floor. She began to speak, not to the doctors, not to the guards, but to Rex. Her voice was a low, melodic hum, the kind of tone she would use to calm a skittish horse in a Montana blizzard. It was the sound of safety. "It's okay, Rex," she whispered, her voice steady, devoid of the sharp edges of fear. "You did a good job, soldier. You brought her here. You kept her safe through the smoke and the glass. You fulfilled the first half of the mission, but the mission is changing now. You have to let us help her finish it. We're the reinforcements, Rex. We're on the same side. The dog's ears twitched. He huffed, a short, sharp burst of air from his nostrils that signaled he was processing her scent. He could smell the lack of cortisol in her sweat. Hannah stayed about 6 feet away, slowly kneeling down on one knee to make herself smaller, less imposing. She wasn't an authority figure anymore. She was a partner. "Look at her, Rex," Hannah continued, her eyes still averted. "She's tired. She needs her breath back. I'm just going to check her pulse. Just a touch. That's all. I'm part of the rescue detail now. I'm the medic on the line." She moved an inch closer. Rex didn't snarl. He didn't shift his weight to lunge. He watched her hand as she slowly, very slowly, reached toward Grace's limp wrist. Hannah made sure every movement was telegraphed, predictable, and gentle. She could feel the heat radiating from the dog's massive, vibrating body. She could smell the dust, the copper scent of blood, and the burnt rubber of the crash site on his fur. Behind her, Dr. Harris held his breath, his hand gripped tight around a laryngoscope. The security guards had their fingers on their holsters, their eyes locked on the 80-pound predator. For a heartbeat, the entire ER held its collective breath. The only sound was the rhythmic beeping of the monitor and the heavy, wet breathing of the dog. Rex's nose twitched, sniffing the air between them. He smelled the antiseptic. He smelled the fear of the doctors. And then he smelled Hannah. He didn't smell aggression. He didn't smell a threat. He smelled a calm, focused intent that mirrored his own tactical training. Slowly, the tension in Rex's shoulders began to bleed away. He didn't move from his position at the foot of the bed, but he lowered his massive head, resting his chin on the very edge of the hospital mattress. He gave a long, shuddering sigh, the canine equivalent of a tactical surrender. "I have a pulse," Hannah said, her fingers finally finding the thready, rapid beat at the girl's wrist. "Vitals are stable, but weak. Dr. Harris, you can move in now, but keep your voices low. No shouting, no sudden movements. He's letting us in, but he's still on watch. Treat him like a senior NCO on the scene." The trauma team, which had been ready to treat the dog as a hostile combatant, moved in with a new, hushed sense of respect. They followed Hannah's lead, moving with a deliberate, surgical quiet. As they worked to stabilize Grace, Rex stayed exactly where he was, a silent, hairy guardian who had finally accepted a new member into his pack. He watched every IV line and every bandage with a piercing intensity, but he remained still, trusting the woman who spoke his language. If you realize knowledge and patience can calm chaos, type, "I was wrong." The surgery lasted 4 grueling hours. Grace had sustained a grade 2 splenic laceration, a moderate concussion, and several broken ribs. While the surgeons worked in the upstairs sterile suite, Rex refused to leave the waiting area outside the restricted surgical zone. He sat by the heavy double doors, his head up, ignoring the premium treats and water bowls the janitorial staff tried to offer him. He was a professional on a post, and his watch was not over until his charge was awake and out of danger. At 5:30 p.m., the sound of heavy, rhythmic boots echoed down the hallway. It was the sound of the military high command, a man in his late 50s, wearing a perfectly pressed Marine Corps uniform with 3 stars gleaming on each shoulder, walked toward the nursing desk. General Vance looked like he had been carved out of a block of granite. His face was a mask of stoic control, but his eyes were bloodshot and raw with the fatigue of a father who had spent the last hour imagining the worst. Beside him was a younger sergeant in a tactical vest, the K-9 handler. He looked devastated, his shoulders slumped. "I'm sorry, sir," the sergeant was saying, his voice thick with guilt. "I was at the supply depot on the other side of the base. I should have been in the vehicle. I should have been there to manage him." "Where is she?" the general asked the receptionist, his voice low and dangerous. Before the receptionist could even open her mouth, Rex stood up. He didn't run to the general like a common pet. He walked with a dignified, slow pace and sat directly in front of him, letting out a low, mournful whine that sounded like a sit rep, a report of the day's events. "Rex," the general whispered, reaching down with a trembling hand to bury his fingers in the dog's thick neck fur. "Thank you for staying with her. Good boy, your handler's here now." "Good boy." Dr. Harris walked out to give the medical update. He explained the successful surgery and the stable prognosis. But then his tone shifted. He looked toward the nursing station where Hannah was sitting. "General, I should also mention that the situation in the ER could have been catastrophic. Your K9 was extremely protective. We were seconds away from having security intervene with force, which likely would have delayed the life-saving intervention Grace needed." The general's brow furrowed, his eyes turning into ice. "Security force? Rex has been with my family for 5 years. He was a bomb detection dog in the middle of Fallujah before I adopted him when his handler was killed in an ambush. He doesn't trust strangers easily, especially when the stakes are high. He thinks everyone is a threat until proven otherwise. Who handled it? Who made the decision not to shoot?" Harris gestured to where Hannah was sitting, finishing her charting at the end of her 12-hour shift. She looked exhausted, her light blue scrubs stained with the sweat and the grime of a day's worth of high-stakes labor. Nurse Cole, the sergeant, the handler, said, his eyes wide with genuine surprise, "You're the one who got a Fallujah veteran to stand down without a tranquilizer?" "How?" Hannah stood up, brushing a stray hair from her face. "I just spoke his language for a minute, Sergeant. He was doing exactly what he was trained to do. He wasn't the problem. He was the only one in that room who truly understood what Grace needed, a guardian who wouldn't blink." The handler walked over to Hannah, his voice filled with a profound, bone-deep respect. "Rex isn't just a dog, nurse. He has seen 3 combat tours. He has a silver star for locating a wounded Marine under heavy fire and dragging him to cover while under direct engagement. Do you know who that Marine was? It was a Navy corpsman, a medic. Rex has an affinity for healers, but he's also seen them get hurt. He wasn't just protecting Grace from you. He was protecting you from the chaos. To get a dog like that to trust a stranger in a chaotic hospital, that's not just a trick. That's elite-level communication. You recognized his rank before you even knew it." The general walked over next. He stood a full head taller than Hannah. He didn't offer a corporate handshake. He stood at attention, a silent, powerful tribute from a 3-star general to a rookie nurse. "Nurse Cole," the general said, his voice like gravel, "I've spent 30 years commanding men. I know what courage looks like. It isn't always found in the person pulling the trigger or leading the charge. Sometimes it's found in the person who has the sense to be still when everyone else is moving. You saved more than just my daughter's time today. You saved the dignity of my family's oldest friend. If my security had hurt that dog, I don't think Grace would have ever forgiven this hospital." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, heavy, gold-colored coin, a challenge coin with the Marine Corps insignia. The Corps values 3 things above all: honor, courage, and commitment. You showed all 3 in that ER bay. Keep this. It means that if you ever need a door opened or a line held in this city, you call me. You're part of the family now." The justice of the moment was silent but deafening. The senior staff, including Dr. Harris, watched as the general honored the rookie they had overlooked. They realized that Hannah's softness wasn't a weakness. It was a sophisticated level of empathy that they had long ago forgotten in their pursuit of clinical throughput. Dr. Harris realized that while he was a master of the scalpel, he was a novice in the art of the soul. If you believe true professionalism shows under pressure, type, "I am in debt." 2 days later, Grace was fully awake. She was sitting up in her hospital bed, a colorful bandage on her arm, laughing at a story her father was telling. Rex was lying on a soft rug next to her bed, his tail thumping rhythmically against the linoleum. He was no longer a warrior on an active post. He was just a happy dog with a girl who was getting better. He looked younger somehow, the tension of the mission finally replaced by the peace of the recovery. Hannah walked in to check the IV fluids. As soon as she entered the room, Rex's head popped up. He didn't growl. He didn't tense. He stood up, walked over to Hannah, and leaned his massive, warm head against her leg. He let out a soft huff of recognition, a thank you in his own tongue. "He remembers you," Grace said, her voice a bit raspy but cheerful. "My dad told me what you did. He said you were the K9 whisperer of the entire East Coast. He said the whole ER was ready to start a war until you stepped in." Hannah smiled, kneeling down to give Rex a proper, deep scratch behind the ears. "I just knew he was a good soldier who needed to know the fight was over and the reinforcements had arrived. He did all the hard work, Grace. I just gave him a break." The story of the Guardian and the Rookie spread through the hospital like wildfire. It became a required lesson during the next month's staff meeting. Dr. Harris himself stood up in front of the entire department and apologized to Hannah, admitting that his first instinct would have turned a medical emergency into a tactical disaster. He admitted that his fear of the dog was actually a fear of losing control, and that Hannah had shown him that control is found in connection, not force. The hospital board even decided to implement a new training module for all emergency staff on how to handle service animals and military K9s in crisis situations, with Hannah Cole appointed as the lead instructor for the entire regional network. They realized that in a military town, understanding the bond between a soldier and their K9 was just as important as knowing how to read an EKG. They called it the Rex Rule, a protocol that prioritized psychological safety as a foundation for physical healing. The general stayed true to his word. He didn't just send flowers, he made sure the hospital's administration knew exactly whose expertise had prevented a tragedy. He even arranged for Rex to be the official mascot for the hospital's new veteran outreach program. But for Hannah, the real reward wasn't the gold coin in her locker or the praise from the board. It was the feeling of Rex's tail hitting her leg every time she walked by room 412. It was the realization that in the middle of a storm, the most important thing you can bring to a room isn't a weapon or a rank. It's a calm heart and the willingness to listen to those who can't speak. If you believe patience and respect can change tense situations, type, "I will live a decent life." In a modern world that values speed, technological power, and the loudest voice in the room, we often forget that true strength is found in the power of observation. We live in a society that wants to manage every problem with force, to bark orders and demand immediate results. We treat every obstacle as an enemy to be conquered, rather than a soul to be understood. We forget that fear often dresses up as rage, and that a growl is often just a plea for help. This story isn't just about a nurse and a dog. It's about the concept of the quiet professional. It's about the fact that sometimes the most effective thing you can do in a crisis is to stop, breathe, and look for the logic and the love hidden behind the fear. It's about recognizing that everyone, from a 3-star general to a battle-worn German shepherd, is carrying a burden that we can only see if we're willing to look past the surface. In every office, in every hospital, in every home, there are Rexes. There are people and creatures who are acting out of fear, protection, or deep-seated pain. They aren't trying to be difficult. They are simply trying to be safe in a world that feels dangerous. If we meet them with force, we create a battle. If we meet them with understanding, we create a bridge. We create a space where healing can actually begin. Hannah Cole proved that a title like Rookie is just a label for someone who hasn't been jaded by the system yet. Experience isn't just about the number of years you've spent on a job. It's about the quality of the attention you pay to the living world around you. She wasn't a hero with a cape or a badge of rank. She was just a nurse who did her job with her heart open. And sometimes, doing the right thing in a quiet, respectful way is the most heroic thing a human being can do. As you go about your day, remember Rex. Remember the Iron Shield who just needed to be told that the mission was over. And remember Hannah, the woman who had the courage to be calm when the world was screaming. Remember that the greatest power you possess is your ability to stay human in an inhuman situation. Be the person who looks for the whisper in the middle of the shout, because that is where the truth usually lives. The voiceover concludes as the camera pans up to the clear, blue sky over the Capitol. They said a nurse couldn't hold the line against a battle-hardened warrior, but she didn't fight the warrior. She understood his heart. She discovered that the greatest power in a crisis isn't a weapon or a star on a shoulder. It's the simple, quiet courage to stay calm and remind those in pain that they are finally home. Value the quiet professionals, for they are the ones who truly hold the world together. If this story touched your heart, leave a comment and subscribe to the Code Whispers. These are the stories that shouldn't be forgotten.